Looking for something to read? Well, these are the books that I've written. Hop on down to the description to find the Amazon links for all 4 of them, and keep your eyes open for more in the future. With that said, on to the video. Hello ladies and gentlemen, I am the Omni viewer. And now that GAMERA REBIRTH is done, and I think enough time has passed that most of you have seen it and have been able to form your own thoughts on it, I'd like to do a little follow-up to what I want to see next. What I want to see come after Rebirth. A sort of GAMERA Afterbirth, if you will. Maybe I should rephrase that. It probably won't be the title. Anyway, this is just a little bit of my thoughts on what I'd like to see next from GAMERA. Although to start off, I would like to say about the review I did of the final episode. Yes, I know I made a couple of mistakes in there. I actually knew the various things you guys pointed out, but I didn't mention them in the review because this has been another string of nights where for some reason I just haven't been sleeping well, and not sleeping well can affect how well my brain processes stuff, especially if, like what I did, I made the video as soon as I was done watching the episode. So yes, I know that the government did not actually make GAMERA, but that he was hatched from an object GAMERA left behind before dissolving into dust. Yes, I did see the after-credits scene, or should I say mid-credits scene, where Mr. Takagi becomes Steve Jobs, and we learn that Joe is not dead, or at least not as dead as we were led to believe. So there is clear setup for a second season. That being said, I do still stand by my assessment that if this was the only season we got, I feel like that is still very satisfying on its own. GAMERA REBIRTH could be a one-season anime, and even with the sequel hook, I think I would still be satisfied. Not that I don't want to see a second season. I'm sure that they could be able to pull it off. But I do still feel like it reached a point where, if that was it, I would be okay with it. And I gotta tell you, that doesn't always happen in anime. I know that a lot of you kaiju fans don't necessarily watch anime. I actually have seen a lot of anime, and I can tell you from experience, sometimes anime series don't have good endings. Sometimes they don't have endings at all. Sometimes you get the weird postmodern stuff, especially in an age where Neon Genesis Evangelion looms over the medium. Sometimes they only adapt the source material up to a certain point, and then they either run out of stuff because the next chapter hasn't come yet, so they have to stop, or there's plenty of source material left, but they basically just decided, you know what, we don't want to do this anymore. You want to know what happens next? Read the original manga. Or sometimes they make up their own ending if they run out of source material and it just doesn't fit with what came before. There's all kinds of reasons why other anime series don't necessarily end well. It's not like it's impossible, mind you. I'm not saying that all anime don't have endings or don't have satisfying endings. I'm just saying that it is surprisingly common in the medium. And GAMERA REBIRTH is not an example of that. It feels satisfying when we reach the final scene. So, ultimately, I'm not opposed to the idea of a second season, but regardless of what the next step of the GAMERA franchise is, I still have my thoughts on what I'd like to see happen. So the rest of the video will be devoted to that. I just wanted to address that before going forward. Alright, so from here on out, this is what I want to see in any future GAMERA project, regardless if it's a continuation of Rebirth or a complete reboot, and regardless of where that reboot comes from. This is stuff that I just think would be good to do. And the first thing, which I think is actually very important, is I'd like to see new monsters introduced. Now again, don't get me wrong, I loved seeing all those classic kaiju come back and get a much needed upgrade, and yes, I would like to see them fill in the gaps with the rest of them at some point. But the thing is, we can't just keep relying on recycling the same old stuff. The Gamera series is collectively much shorter than something like the Godzilla series, so there aren't as many different monsters to draw from. Then again, even with its wide variety of monsters, it seems like Toho is still only ever interested in bringing back Mothra and King Ghidorah, but that's beside the point. The actual point is that the Gamera series only has so many monsters established in it, and we can only recycle them so many times before it might get stale. The benefit of the kaiju genre, however, is that you can always add new material. It's not like a comic book movie where it takes a Herculean effort to introduce a new character. And if you do introduce a new character, that character is probably not likely to stay around very long. Harley Quinn is the exception, not the rule. The kaiju genre has never had that issue, though. So any kind of new monster can be brought in, something that can give Gamera a new kind of challenge. Or perhaps give him something he's never had before. This is another thing I'd like to see them try, even if it's only once. How about giving Gamera an ally? Not a human that he's got some kind of connection to. I mean another monster that will fight alongside him. Kind of like how Godzilla has different allies in the form of Anguirus, or Mothra depending on the time of day, or King Caesar, things like that. Gamera has never had one of those. Now granted, that's part of Gamera's appeal and mystique. He is the only monster in his universe that looks out for mankind. He is fighting completely on his own, with the exception of when the military gets its rear in gear and fights alongside him as well. And of course that makes him an underdog, which means that even despite all the odds, no matter how much damage he takes, the fact that he's still able to win and do so on his own just makes him that much more impressive. That being said, though, I do think it would be an interesting shakeup to the formula if at one point we saw Gamera allied with another monster. I mean, it wouldn't be that hard to do. Rebirth, I mentioned a couple of times, or at least once, felt kind of like it had an Ultraman-esque formula, and the Ultra series has shown us how that sort of thing could work. Let's just put forward a hypothetical Gamera scenario in which this could happen. Two new monsters appear. One of them is usually very peaceful and doesn't bother anyone, unless of course the other monster shows up, and that other monster is an evil, destructive force which, if left unchecked, will completely destroy the world. So that first monster exists to oppose it. However, in this particular instance, something happens that gives the destructive monster an edge, that prevents the other monster from actually doing its job and stopping him. And of course, because it's causing destruction, it lands on Gamera's radar. He intervenes, he can't stop it either. So, in this particular instance, Gamera and this other monster have to tag team this thing in order to save the day. I think that would be interesting. It would be something that we haven't seen in the Gamera series before. And again, I think it would be an interesting way to see how Gamera reacts to that. Like, he's used to being alone. He's used to being the lone wolf, aside from the bond he has with whichever protagonist the movie or episode goes with at the time. What if he had a kaiju ally? And of course, what becomes of that kaiju ally? Does it survive to maybe one day join Gamera again at some point? Does it not survive, leaving him alone again? I mean, there are places you could go with this, and I'd be curious to see if that sort of thing ever happens. I don't know if it will, but I do think there is potential. Although there is a way it could happen, and I'm sure you already predicted where this video's going. So, everyone knows it. The one thing fans have wanted to see for years is to have Gamera officially cross paths with Godzilla. We're close to that, I think. Another video I did not too long ago reported that there is technically an official place where Gamera and Godzilla are crossing over. It's in a mobile game, Godzilla Battle Lines, and I realize that's not a movie, but still, we were told that Toho and Kadokawa hate each other to the point where a crossover was never going to happen at all, in any medium. And now we have this. Is it just a cash grab? It very well could be. I can't shake the feeling, though, that they might also be using it to test the waters. Because Toho and Kadokawa, when you get right down to it, are studios. They're going to process things not by entertainment value or artistic value, but monetary value. So something like this, where they can look at the monetary intake of it, that is something that's going to get their attention. And if they combine that with the numbers for Gamera Rebirth, which at this point I'm not sure how well it's doing, but it's being very well received, so I can't imagine it's doing that poorly, then they might look at this and think, well, maybe we can work something out. And as I said previously, I don't have any objections to how they intend to do it, as long as they at least give it a shot. And yes, that includes potentially introducing Gamera into the monsterverse. Since I brought that up, though, I would like to address something that I have seen floating around as an objection to this idea. A lot of people have said that they don't want to see Gamera introduced into the monsterverse because of things like how he would be redundant because Godzilla is already the protector of Earth, or how all that would happen is that Gamera would be introduced and get his butt kicked by Godzilla because Godzilla's going to be deemed more powerful. But I don't necessarily think those things are the only options we're dealing with here. As far as redundancy, I mean, the MonsterVerse has established within its world that there are different kinds of Titans that have different kinds of roles, and there's more than one Titan who is a protector. So Gamera could be another one of those. And in light of that, there isn't necessarily a reason for Gamera to be introduced as an opponent to Godzilla in the MonsterVerse. He could be introduced up front as an ally. Like, give him a solo movie to introduce him, show where his origins are and what happens when he is introduced into the modern world, and then do a crossover, like Godzilla x Gamera Guardians, something like that, where it's already established up front that they are teaming up. That way you avoid the whole versus problem, and you allow both of the monsters to have their fair shake, you know? At the same time, though, I'm not opposed to Toho and Kadokawa working something out in which they produce a crossover directly. As long as Toho backs off, because Gamera Rebirth has of course revealed that the problem with the Godzilla Polygon trilogy was not Hiroyuki Seshita. I am willing to put that all behind him and say that from this point onward, Hiroyuki Seshita should be remembered not as the director of those movies, but as the director of Gamera Rebirth. But all the same, he wasn't the problem with those movies. Toho was the problem. And they've been a problem when it comes to recent Godzilla stuff. So the real issue is not whether or not they can get along with another studio long enough to produce some kind of collaboration. We know they can do that because they licensed him out to appear in Shinkalion, which is a completely different anime about transforming train mechs. But the bigger issue is whether or not Toho will actually interfere when it's happening. Like, how much of a death grip they're going to have on it. I think Godzilla -1 is going to be a new kind of testing ground, if you will, where we will see if Toho has decided to back off and let the director make the movie he wanted to make, or if they kept stepping in and saying, no, we want you to make another Shin Godzilla because Shin Godzilla made money and we need more money, more Shin Godzilla, more Shin Godzilla. We will see. I'm hoping it's the former. But I'm bracing myself for the latter, even as the trailers continue to look good. Only time will tell in that regard, but we're talking about Gamera here. Godzilla and Gamera together, everybody knows that's something we want to see, but it's not necessarily the only crossover. This last one I can't take credit for, because I've seen other people proposing it. But there is another kaiju from Daiei, which I believe Kadokawa has the rights to as well, that they could cross over Gamera with if they wanted to, and not have to worry about all that licensing stuff. Majin, or Daimajin if you prefer. Daimajin is of course the other big kaiju franchise that Daiei produced in the 60s, his trilogy debuting the same time that Gamera got his first sequel. Although if you were to put the two movies side by side, you would never guess they were from the same company. Gamera had the lower budget special effects and was a bit weirder and stranger and more kid-friendly. Majin clearly had better special effects. It was more serious, more adult-oriented. It was a period piece, very dramatic. And yet, they are, for all intents and purposes, brothers. Moreover, this is another instance where both monsters are technically good guys. And this could play into the whole idea of Gamera having an ally that I said earlier, but it would be a very interesting kind of alliance. I see the potential Gamera-Majin dynamic as almost Superman-Batman-like, where Gamera is the bright, hopeful superhero, and Majin is the dark, violent anti-hero. What would it be like to see those two together? Who knows? And the beauty of it is you could do anything with it. You could have Majin in Gamera's time, you could have Gamera in Majin's time, you could do something completely unexpected. Who knows? Now, yes, I am aware that there have been other revivals of Daimajin in various forms prior to Gamera coming back, but they've also haven't really gotten much attention outside of Japan, for reasons I'm not really sure about. Every once in a while someone will mention them, but overall they just don't get that much attention. Probably because they're not streaming in the West anywhere. There is one that's coming, the Great Yokai War Guardians, which is kind of a Daimajin related thing. Daimajin is in it at least, and that's going to be licensed and released by SRS Cinema. But otherwise, he just hasn't gotten as much attention. But the minute you dropped Gamera's name, everybody wanted to know when Gamera was coming back. So having them coexist, that could be interesting. Again, I can't take credit for coming up with that, but I do think it's an idea that could work going forward. In the right hands, of course. And anyway, that's all I can come up with, at least for this video. If you guys have any ideas of where you want to see the Gamera series go next, now would certainly be the time to let Katakawa know, so let's get the word out there. Until such time as we meet again, this is the Omni Viewer signing off. Thank you all for watching. If you want to see us keep doing what we're doing, you might consider doing all the usual YouTube things, as well as hopping down to the description to find links to DeviantArt, Patreon, Twitter, and links for the different books in the Tales from the Omni Vault universe. Your support is naturally appreciated. Thank you for watching, and we'll see you next time.